According to the urban planner Kevin Lynch, the city can be read as a text, structured by objects that can be identified in space. Among them stands out nodes, strategic points, roundabouts, traffic lights, and landmarks, buildings and monuments recognizable from different angles and distances. The monument to Columbus was built on the occasion of the Universal Exhibition of 1888, in the exact same place where we see it now. It is important on a symbolic level. The figures of both historical and allegorical characters that conform its parts commemorate the discovery of the New World, seen as a historical event vindicated equally by Catalans and Spaniards. Its location has even more symbolic relevance. As you can see, it is located in the Portal de la Pau, where two important roads merge, Las Ramblas and Passeig de Colón, near the Avinguda Paral·lel and Ronda Litoral, right at the exit to the old commercial port. Nowadays, it serves as a point of reference, both for locals and tourists. It indicates the end of Las Ramblas and the proximity to the beach. It receives and sees the cruisers off and controls the traffic of vehicles entering and leaving the city.
The monuments guarantee the continuity of certain ideals and moral and aesthetic positions. Not everyone agrees that nowadays the monument to Columbus deserves to adorn one of the most important round boats in the city. Besides Barcelona, other cities are proposing a revision that, instead of celebrating the discovery, will make visible the American resistance against imperialism, oppression, and racial segregation. Taking into account that the celebration of October 12th, as the date of the discovery of America and Columbus Day, is being increasingly questioned, shouldn't the existence of the monument that commemorates it be equally questioned? If the statue of Columbus itself is already offensive to the Latin American communities that live in the city, more so are the sculptures and plaques in the base of the monument that explicitly show the Native Americans in a position of submission to the colonizers. According to Daniela Ortiz, Peruvian artist and activist, the monument of Columbus legitimized the colonial order represented in the alien internment centers, in the persecution and deportation of migrants, and in the institutional racism. In her own words, that's why it is useful to have a Native American kneeling before a priest, because it maintains the narrative that we have to be on our knees before the first-class citizens, Spanish or European or Catalan.
Even if we do not see the statue, this pedestal gives us information about the main business initiatives and the most outstanding achievements of the absent honoree. In addition, as projected by the architect Josep Oriol Mestres for the Universal Exposition of 1888, through the ensemble of bas-reliefs and inscriptions, it works as an agglutinator of the art of the time. Each one of these allegories is the work of some of the most representative sculptures of Renaissance art, such as Rosend Novas, Francesc Pagès y Serratosa, or Joan Roig Soler. These bas-reliefs, in particular, conceived by Lluís Puiggener, shows a female figure with a sign that reads López. It is the surname of the Marquis, and also the name of one of his ships. The figure personifies the Spanish Transatlantic Company, a large fleet that transported goods between the colonies and the metropolis, It played an important role in the industrialization of Catalonia and the establishment of Barcelona as a center of colonial trade. In addition, this fleet collaborated with the transport of troops, provisions and ammunition during the War of Africa of 1859. These bas-reliefs show different companies founded by Lopez during the 19th century. Their modernist style turns the pedestal into a valuable artistic testimony.
Here, in the middle of the 21st century in Barcelona, we have a square dedicated to a slaveholder, which seems pretty precarious and especially very sad for those of us who have to live here and see this man every day. According to Josep Bracons y Clapés, art historian, head of the Department of Collections and Heritage Centers of the Museum of History of Barcelona, to put a figure on a pedestal, to dedicate a public space to it, to turn a certain figure into a reference point in the public space is obviously an honor. The inscription in the pedestal still says to Antonio Lopez, a great navigator, etc. But one thing is the name, which also appears on the street signs, and another thing is the statue and its strength as an icon. It is not a question of erasing the memory of Antonio Lopez, but a matter of questioning whether Antonio Lopez deserves the honor to occupy a public space. Antonio Lopez becomes a questioned character. This broad debate is already an accumulated historiographic debate. During the Civil War, his statue had been already demolished and replaced by the one we have now. And at a certain point, this questioning reaches such social dimension and such an impact that it makes the city council make the decision to remove from public space the honor that having a figure representing Antonio Lopez implies.
It is essential for any society to feel proud of its own history. Through monuments, it is possible to immortalize the most famous and relevant facts. These milestones transcend time and build a common imaginary by projecting the glory of the past. The case of the monument to Prim is a good example of this. Since its placement in 1887, it has helped to foster the most triumphant vision of Spanish and Catalan history. The equestrian portrayal helps to build the figure of General Prim as a representative of a time of conquests and military victories. If we look at the first bas-reliefs that decorates the pedestal, we will see that it depicts him as the president of the government after the glorious revolution of 1868, handing over the military citadel to the Barcelona City Council in order for it to be turned into the current Park de la Ciudadela. In the second one, we see him leading the Catalan troops in the African War. His victories contribute to the legend of Prim, a man immune to bullets.
The glorious construction of the past is not exempt from political interest. The criterion to decide which facts are subject to be glorified is diffused. There are facts of which we can feel proud that will never be immortalized because they are not part of the image that power projects over its own past. The bas-relief of the African War represents a relevant fact. initiated by elites with political and economic interest in the conquest of foreign territory. War is represented as a transcendental moment that needs to be perpetuated so that future citizens can feel proud and inspired to perform similar acts. We should make a revision of what is considered glorious for the history of a nation, or else we will be building our story upon the ruins and corpses of the colonized people.
As pointed out by the art historian and curator Jorge Luis Marzo, monuments like the one that occupies this square construct a narrative of collective identity through its historical, patrimonial, and symbolic value. The monuments, made from long-lasting materials, such as stone or bronze, are conceived to endure through several generations. Thus, they become part not only of the urban landscape, but also of the citizen's memory, function as a mirror of people's identity. Josep Llimona, influential sculptor within the 19th century Catalan modernism, brings back in 1950 the figure of this medieval character. He represents it horseback on a pedestal, wearing a count crown and with a regal bearing that makes him embody the glory of a millenary Catalonia.
As Juan José La Huerta, architect and the head of collections at the National Museum of Art of Catalonia, states, if we take the idea that the monument is a mechanism, an instrument, a necessary condensation of the image of power, I will say that on the one hand, the monument has nothing to do with nostalgia. Power is never nostalgic. In any case, it transmits nostalgia downwards, the bad kind of nostalgia. And indeed, the spearhead of future situations will always be those that suit the power. Depending on the dominant ideology, some characters and symbols are chosen to rewrite and reinterpret history and institutionalize a telling of the past. The example of Berenguer is particular because it was used by different ideologies. When placed during the Franco regime, his marriage with María Rodríguez de Vivar, daughter of the Cid Campeador, was prioritized, a fact that was interpreted as a symbol of the union of the crowns of Castilla and Aragon. Later on, with the arrival of democracy and the beginning of the autonomic demands, politicians like Jordi Pujol resignified Berenguer as a decisive figure of the configuration of Catalonia as a nation. These interpretations turn historical figures into diffuse characters whose legacy is subject to the needs of power, subordinating the critical spirit of citizenship to a partial account of history.
Many monuments located in the most privileged places of the city are designed to show the exceptional importance of some personalities and thus cause a feeling of admiration for his figure and his work. We are at the junction of the Gran Via de las Corts Catalanas with the Rambla de Catalunya. Here we see the monument to Joan Güell i Ferrer, looking towards the district of Sants, where Vapor Vell, the most emblematic of its textile companies, was located. The press of the time highlighted the virtues of Güell. The life of Joan Güell i Ferrer is the life of the Catalan industry of the 19th century. He was a man of the people and at the same time a nobleman, but he was more of a man of the people who gave his people the formula of the secret to become noblemen. It consists in always making the spirit fit one's social position and one's context, obeying when necessary, ruling when convenient, leading when one is prepared. It was, above all, this spiritual coexistence of the worker and the aristocrat that turned him into a true lord of Barcelona.
According to Juan José La Huerta, the monument is one of these rocks that we carry on our backs thinking of a better future, based on a past taken as a model. But all this, in the most transparent way that you can imagine, are mechanisms of power. The monument is the face of power. It literally is. That is, those depicted in the monument are usually generals, civil governors, great bourgeois. Monuments are the essence of hierarchy. The monument lets you know what stands above you, what you must aspire to, but it also indicates how far you can get. The monument is the limit, and it is a system of control. The monument organizes the city. There is an idea of control, a reality of physical control. The city is organized with monuments that occupy the square, that are placed at the ending points of the avenues, etc. And from the non-physical point of view, it is also organized mentally, ideologically, the space of public life. Revolts and popular revolutions are expressed in the streets, modifying the image that power imposed on urban space. In 1936, the monument to Güell, as well the monument dedicated to his relative, the Black Grandfather, Antonio López and López, were thrown to the ground by popular movements. It was alleged that both characters were engaged in the illegal trade of black slaves, representing values considered harmful to society. Both figures, together with that of General Prim, were reconstituted during the Franco regime. The dominant power wanted to return them to the streets of the city, dodging the darkest part of their lives. Today, 2 of the 3 monuments still stand, decorating the streets of Barcelona.
Monuments are capable of embodying the feelings and emotion linked to a historical event. In this case, the War of Succession, initiated in 1705, it originated a fight for the Kingdom of Castile and Aragon between Felipe V of Bourbon and the Archduke Carlos de Austria. The posture and the dramatic expression of the sculpture reminds the Catalans of the sacrifice of their ancestors and the defeat of Barcelona on September 11, 1740, followed by the loss of institutions of self-government and a harsh cultural repression. The pedestal that we are looking at as a high relief, in which 2 female figures represent how the national spirit awakens a sleeping Catalonia. Since its inauguration in 1888, the monument has generated great sympathy and has been the object of floral offerings. During the Franco era, it was withdrawn, along with all the sculptures that encouraged the Catalan nationalist feeling. With the arrival of democracy in 1976, September 11th was declared a national holiday. The monument was relocated to the place where we are seeing it now, and the tradition of honoring it with commemorative floral offering was recovered.
Using artistic representations in the urban space, the ruling classes decide which historical memories forge a common identity between the different social classes. In this way, the citizens claim as their own the projects of the oligarchies. According to Juan José La Huerta, the monument always responds to the project, and the project is connected directly with the promises of liberation, which promises about the future. In the future, this will happen. So now you have to sacrifice yourself for it to happen. In 1936, during the Spanish Civil War, the Republican side claimed the figure of Casanova as an example of a citizen committed to his people. The anarchists made him a popular figure, a symbol of a struggle against the absolutist tyranny, forgetting that during the War of the Succession, Casanova declared that if necessary, he will sacrifice the lives of all Barcelonians for the cause of Carlos de Austria. Thanks to this affirmation and for being a strict ruler of the city, the Archduke regarded him with the aristocratic title of honest citizen of the city. If public memory, consecrated through monuments, is everyone's patrimony, will we find any monument that really represents the interest of the citizens?
You're moving this.
Using monuments to decorate our environment is a habit that has changed its form over time, but not its content. Whatever the outcome is, it always intends to reflect the values of a society. For the 1992 Olympic Games, the aim was to present the city as an emblem of modernity, democracy, harmony, and peace. With this idea, the City Council commissioned the creation of a monument that represented this new face of Barcelona. Thus, an accessible, attractive, and depoliticized element was placed in the urban space. It pointed out universal values with which all citizens could identify. The repetition of points, the dynamic lines, and the use of industrial materials, characteristic elements of pop art, made this abstract work that opens up to the subjective interpretation of visitors and inhabitants of the city.
With the arrival of democracy after the death of Franco in 1975, there is a need to re-signify the public space, which had previously been the scene of all social claims. Years later, in 1986, the campaign of the Olympic Games fluted everything, cleaning the face of the city and projecting the image of a society devoid of social conflicts. All the dissident acts were repressed. For example, the Neighborhood Association of Poblenou lost the subsidy of the city council due to its opposition to the demolition of the Icaria neighborhood, where the Olympic Village, a place to host athletes from all over the world, was to be built. The person in charge of the infrastructures for the Games justified this decision, alleging that before freedom of expression, there is freedom of subside. According to Jorge Luis Marzo, art historian and curator, in the 1980s a new public program is initiated, one that incorporates contemporary art. Let's move the politics from the public space and let's make a kind of intervention that is not political. In particular, with the pop art sculpture, so that Barcelona can simply acquire a new status as a global city. A city that is not ideological, that transmits advertising values, postmodern values, values that everyone can cultivate. It is assumed that contemporary art is not ideological, where there is no greater ideology than the override politics in a culture. This is how the Barcelona brand is created, the city without conflicts and ready to be consumed.
The main function of a monument is inscribed in its etymology. The word comes from the Latin monumentum, which means to remember, to advise, or to warn. That is why many of the monuments show admiration and public respect for the memory of a specific case. L'Estel Ferit, The Wounded Star is a tribute to the legendary chiringuitos, typical beach bars and cafes that prior to the 1992 Olympics were scattered through the maritime line of Barceloneta. These chiringuitos were seen as deteriorated barracks that did not correspond with the image of the Olympic city. After their withdrawal, the modernized Barcelona was again open to the sea, with a series of beaches suitable for bathing and for the entertainment of the population, thus adapting to the new urban needs. This contribution in the field of public art were designed to fulfill several objectives: to bring art closer to people, to generate a dialogue between the sculptures and the place where they were located, and to reflect the past while being a symbol of modernity.
As a rule, a monument is erected after a long process of reflection in which the event or place that it honors is given a certain value. However, the case of l'Estel Ferit, the Wonder Star, is particular because it was built while the chiringuitos that it sought to commemorate disappeared. Justifying the revitalization of the periphery, the Olympic constructions were initiated and it was decided to monumentalize these neighborhoods. According to Pascual Maragall, mayor of the city at the time, the intention was to take art to the streets and squares of the neighborhoods that traditionally lacked sculptures, and at the same time that this art held a very direct link with the environment, making it better. The international and modern city could no longer commemorate the new generals or bourgeois in its streets. The art that pretended to be depolitized with supposed artistic freedom was actually directed by a totally controlled political project. Who decided to give these iron blocks such an appearance so that they paid tribute to the chiringuitos? The artist or those who commissioned the work? What makes a monument meaningful? Its shape or the history of a place that required sculptures to fill the void? In the context of the modern Barceloneta, commercialized and crowded by tourism, the work does not even perform its function of memory. For most of the people who pass through this place, l'Estel Ferit, the Wounded Star, is no more than another work of contemporary art with which to take selfies, part of the skyline of the beach, or a block that projects a shadow to hide from the sun.
Its author, Antoni Llena, comments on the artwork. It has something of a giant head, almost mythological, and at the same time its proportions give an idea of fragility. It may look like a kite or a paper carried by the wind. I think that sometimes architects call sculptures to order them little more than street furniture, which is why I have entered into this game of subtlety and ambiguity to give the piece some personality and autonomy. Llena also explained his interpretation of the myth of David against Goliath. If the face was Goliath, David, defying it, manifests itself in the thin legs that support it. The myth is dilute in ambiguity because at the same time Goliath, unfolding like a giant sail at the mercy of the wind, is transformed into David. Llena's David and Goliath was located where until 1966 stood the neighborhood of Somorrostro. Did the artist want to pay tribute to that shanty town? Did he intend to recall a community or monumentalize a collective of people, the inhabitants of that neighborhood? Can the monument be the last trace of the forgotten neighborhood? This way, the condition of reflection of a human group and its relationship within the space it inhabits would be added to the piece's value as symbolic homage.
As Jorge Luis Marzo, art historian and curator, states, the value of identify is lost. People do not see their reflection anymore. They say, what does this have to do with my neighborhood? I don't know. The value of heritage is lost because it is no longer considered heritage. It is contemporary art, which has a relative value. And then the value of excellence is lost. What is those doing in my square? The politicians say that they no longer try to impose anything, that this is a kind of monument that people will interpret in their own way. And there is no subtler ideology than this one. The ideology that takes away from people even their own ability to be represented by something that truly interests them. Another good example is when people from the neighborhood of La Mina say, hey, we don't have any monuments, what monuments should we make? And they start a fundraising campaign to make a bronze monument of Camarón de la Isla, a famous flamenco singer. They put him there and the city council say, this is not authorized. And they put it back, and he takes it away again. Until finally the city council, tired of this game, says, leave it there. This is an example of how people say, don't bother us with this abstract bullshit. What we want is something that we can identify with, something that is ours. Do not get me wrong, I'm not saying that contemporary art cannot be symbolically representative of a space, but it should be preceded by a preparation process that must be encouraged by the people themselves, not by the state, by the power, or by the city council.